Let's now take it across to the management of Maruti. We had a conversation earlier on in the day about festive demand and view going forward, how things are panning out, what are the key trends. Let's listen in.
Karna, the retails have been pretty good right through the festive season. As you know, the festive season is in auto terms classified into three parts. First is the starting from the Navratras, the 10 days of Navratra, including the Dashara. And then there is a 15-day in between, and then we have the 5-day Diwali period, starting with Dhanteras, ending with Bhai Dooj. So I think this is an entire 1 month period. The retails were pretty good. And in fact, if you look at October separately, because remember this time, this festive season has actually has fallen partly in October and partly in November. Whereas last year, if you compare it with last year, where the entire season was in October. So even if you compare October to October of last year, then also there seems to be a pretty strong retail sales. In fact, the wholesale was 330,000 in the industry, and the retail was 370,000, indicating actually a reduction in stock from the beginning of October.
So if we look at the final leg of the festive season, the 5-day period that you were talking about, is there a number that you could share with us?
Yes, we have already. So if you look at the last, the 5 days period, the deliveries were roughly between 41,000 or so, 41 to 42,000. Normally in this period, like last year, the deliveries were close to about 40,000. So that's the range in which the deliveries happened for the last 5 years. If you see 39 to 40,000. So this time I would say it was marginally better in the period of that 5-day period which you are referring to.
Would it then suffice to say that the second half of the year is likely to be solid, or are there any short-term roadblocks that you still foresee?
So when we see the current levels of enquiries and booking, then we are confident, obviously, of coverage till December end. However, going beyond that, remember the current demand, we believe there is a lot of pent-up demand element in it. As you know, Q1 was a washout in this year. So I don't know till what time the pent-up demand continues, but and we'll see to that. But there is some uncertainty beyond the Q3, which is beyond the December period, because as you know, the long-term steady-state demand for automobile depends on the fundamentals of economy and also on the sentiment, because car buying is a discretionary purchase. So we are not so sure which way the sentiment will move, and largely that's because of the COVID situation. So you could have an upside if you have a vaccine sentiment, going positive, or you could have a downside if the number of cases increase, or if there is a second wave or a third wave, whatever, as we keep hearing in the news these days. So a lot of the things are uncertain, and that's the reason why most auto industries are apprehensive of giving forward guidance beyond this short-term period of this quarter end.
So, last month as well on the analyst call and to the media, you had refrained from calling out a decisive recovery beyond festive. So the company's stance is as is, right? There's no change, or there's no forward-looking projections that you would like to make, even for the short term.
That's right, because beyond December period, as I just mentioned, there are many uncertain elements, and we are really not wanting to give a forward guidance without being sure.
Let's talk about the numbers that we have so far. If we look at October sales, Mr. Srivastava, as many as 7 out of top 10 selling passenger vehicles were from the Maruti cap, and it comes as no surprise really. Can we say that there is still a clear preference for small vehicles, which perhaps had a big role to play in this kind of a trend?
So if you look at even in the last year or in the year previous to that, which was 18-19, then you look at 19-20 and 2021 so far, 7 out of the top 10 models in the country are actually from Maruti Suzuki. In fact, 8 out of top 11, because the 11th one is also Maruti, are that actually refers to the very good portfolio of vehicles which we have across all segments. So it's not just the entry-level cars, but also, for example, I'll give the example of Vitara Brezza in the SUV segment, and also it's or Ertiga, for example. So it's across. But I will agree with you on this current year's segment. The hatch segment has actually done much better, and the other segment which has done better is the SUV segment for two different reasons. The reason for hatch seems to be that people post-pandemic have downgraded their choices towards a lower end. But the SUV, we have seen a lot of activity in terms of new introduction, and that is perhaps the reason why an SUV longish term has always been in the past few years being that the design preference is towards SUV, which we observed in the last 5-6 years, with the resultant SUV share going up from about 12-16% to today 34-35%. And remember, in the top, when you ask about the top 10 models from of the industry, Vitara Brezza is the model which is also an SUV in the top 10. So Vitara Brezza actually is the number one brand in the entry SUV segment, even though we have seen a lot of activity, the introduction of the Sonnet as well as the Venue from the competitors. But I think the reason why Vitara Brezza has been doing so well is because of its large petrol engine, where consumers are wanting a very smooth and a sophisticated performance of a petrol engine. And there seems to have been a shift towards the petrol across all segments, including the SUV segment. The entry-level SUV segment, actually 62% of diesel it was last year, has become less than 30% this year.
You know, you just got me to my next question. Talking about Brezza, it does lead the entry SUV segment. But
Yes.
if we look at the trend, it is the mid SUV segment which has grown in size in the recent times. What is the strategy to gain share there? If you could talk to us about anything that's in the works or anything that the consumers should be looking forward to.
Yeah, so just for your information, actually the mid SUV segment was much higher than the entry level SUV segment till about 3-4 years back. And ever since the Vitara Brezza came into the entry SUV segment, that segment actually grew larger than the mid SUV segment. So if you look at the last year's figure, this total SUV segment is about 7.3 lakhs, out of which about 3.8 lakh is the entry level segment, and the mid SUV segment is about 3.6, I think, or thereabouts, 3.5 or so. So I think last year the entry SUV segment was much bigger. Probably this year there has been a good number of vehicles coming into the mid SUV segment, with the resultant increase, including the S-Cross from Maruti Suzuki with the BS6 1.5 liter petrol engine. Yes, so this segment is obviously grown large, and a lot of the industry players would be interested in this segment, and we are very closely watching the different segments, which are sub-segments which are emerging within this overall SUV segment. Of course, I will not be able to give you a forward guidance on the project, but on the products, but as I said, Maruti Suzuki always has a very strong product portfolio and a very strong product plan. We are quite positive about the Indian economic growth story, and in the future, the auto industry as well. So we have a very strong product plan, and we will continue to watch this segment also very closely.
I just had another follow-up question for the hatchback segment. Last time when we interacted after Maruti's quarterly numbers, you'd revealed that the share of hatchbacks has gone up to 62%. Firstly, I'd like to know, do you think it could perhaps go up further, given your revenue pie and the changing consumer preferences, at least over the short term? And the second part to the question will be, to what extent do you think it's because of rise in first-time buyers and rural demand?
Yeah, so I think extremely a good question, and I think it is. This has been this can move up. This can move up, but I think we also observe that it has been fairly. This segment seems to change very slowly in terms of this share of the of the overall pie. So if you look at in the industry, of course, for Maruti Suzuki, it is 62, 63%. But for the industry, this share of hatch has been about 45, 47% for the last 3-4 years. It's moved up marginally this year, largely because of Maruti Suzuki's, strength in this area. So I think it may move up marginally, but I think the larger point which you make, and which I completely agree, that ever since this COVID thing happened, consumers have replaced their aspirational buying with more of functionality. So they are moving away from shared mobility, from public transport towards personal mobility. So you see the first-time buyers have gone up by about 4-5 percentage point. In our portfolio, first-time buyers have gone up from about 43-44% to almost 48-49%. So that's a pretty large jump. The additional car buying has gone up by about 3%. But the replacement car buying has come down by almost 8 percentage points in the industry, which means that people are holding on to their older vehicles a little longer. And the second point about the rural markets, yes, the rural markets seem to have bounced back much quicker and much earlier than the urban areas. And there are pretty strong reasons for that, including a fairly widespread monsoon being about 8-9% higher than last year. Then this Kharif sowing has been much larger, about 7% higher than last year. The Rabi crop has been about 151 metric tons, which is about 6% higher than the last year. The MSPs actually has gone up for paddy, for example, gone up about 1,500 rupee a quintal. So I think a combination of this, including the fact that the COVID thing has happened largely in the urban areas in terms of the containment zone or hotspot areas, whether it's Delhi or Mumbai or Pune, Ahmedabad, Chennai, etc. So I think all that has led to the rural demand being higher. And yes, in rural demand, there is a lot of sector-specific demand, which means that these hatches and the vans, for example, have a larger share in the rural areas. So I suppose that also reflects in some ways on the segment-wise share that you referred to.
Maruti has been working in the rural market for many years now. You were one of the first ones to really, to scale it up quite meaningfully, your business, your network, your dealerships as well in rural and semi-urban areas. Given the uptick that we've seen, the buoyancy that we've seen in demand, do you think it's sustainable, or could it perhaps moderate in a couple of quarters?
I think it's not just a short-term phenomena which we have observed in the last few quarters. In fact, if you look at the 10-year timeline, then the rural growths have been higher almost every year than the urban growths. And I think part of this is because of the fundamental changes in the economy. The economic growth, the results of the economic growth are also being seen in rural areas. So the rural incomes have actually been growing up faster than the urban areas. So although it's still less than the urban income levels, of course, but what we've seen is that this trend of rural growth being higher than urban growth we have observed for the last 10 years, not in just the last couple of quarters, with the result that what was just 10% of our overall portfolio sales was rural back in 2007-8. It is now 40% this year so far. So I think this phenomena of will continue, I suppose, or how fast it will continue is a different question altogether. But I think going by the trends which we have observed so far, this trend should continue even in the future.
Mr. Srivastava, let's talk tech and online space. You've been one of the early movers in the industry. Maruti had commenced online bookings back in 2017. Going by the reports, you recently sold about 2 lakh units with over 21 lakh digital enquiries since April 2019. So if you could tell us, has the large chunk of these inquiries and bookings come in the period after COVID and after lockdown, or did you see it actually picking up so phenomenally in the last 1 year?
Yeah, so in fact, the story goes back to about 3.5 years, which was 2016-17, when we realized that this seemed to be the trend, that people have started taking increasing interest in online purchase and also in having the inquiries done through the web. At that time, it was just 2-3% of our total inquiries used to come from the digital platform. We started improving on the digital platform in these years, with the result that if you look at last year, then the inquiry level which had come from the digital platform was about 16%. So that 3% has become 16% in about 2.5 years. However, post COVID, we find that this inquiry levels are now about 35%. So that's acceleration from 16% to 35% has taken place in just these 2-3 quarters, about 8-9 months actually. So which we believe is irreversible now, that this trend should continue. So that has been what pandemic, I think, has done, is accelerated immensely the already trend of greater digitalization. And thankfully, Maruti Suzuki had identified, we didn't know the pandemic, of course, but we did identify this trend. And our digital platform is, I would say, one of the best in the industry, in which even the financing part, which is about 2-3 touch points of the total consumer journey, is also now digitalized, something which is unique in the industry, and it's not done by any other manufacturer in the country.
Mr. Srivastava, one can totally understand the 21 lakh digital inquiries, but you've also done a 2 lakh worth of sale online. Talk to us about how the consumer acceptance has evolved, because if it were to me, I would be a bit wary of buying cars online completely without actually physically seeing the look and feel of it, going for a test drive, etc. So how does it work?
Yeah, so actually the sale which you are referring to is not as if the payment and everything has been done through the online. It is basically the source of inquiry, which is the online, which has resulted into the final conversion. Remember that in automobile we always talk of phygital rather than digital. And the two parts, the two touch points, which I think has not worldwide not been able to be digitalized, is the actual test drive and also the actual delivery. Since, but what digital refers to is, and most research now point it out, that 94% of the buyers of the car buyers, they actually start their process and investigation about which car, research about which car to buy online. And 47% of the car buyers actually decide before they come to the showroom which car they are going to buy. And that brings the strength and the power of digital space in the entire car buying process. And remember, it's not just a urban phenomena. In both urban as well in the smaller towns, this phenomena is equally powerful, and it's really important now for a good marketer to strengthen their digital platform.